Hello, and thank you for joining me today for managing multiple healthcare facilities. Our topic today will be visibility. My name is Linda Pinion, and I'll be your host. Our agenda today will start out with looking at some of the benefits of Sage Intacct's multi-entity environment. This will help you to understand the foundational components of multi-entity as we look at reporting and visibility. We'll then take a closer look at the solution, and we'll finish up by looking at some key takeaways. In talking to multiple healthcare organizations, we've learned that there are some common pain points that everyone is experiencing. Perhaps you can relate to some of these that you're seeing here on the screen. For many healthcare organizations, it's all about how they are processing the data. And for many of them, that includes lots of transactions, lots of activity in spreadsheets. And as we all know, spreadsheets are a great tool that we all use. However, there are some pitfalls to using spreadsheets. And some of those really relate to having information in multiple places, not having information that's accurate and up to date. And because of that, it has some impact on our monthly close. It may take us longer to get to that point where we are ready to close the period. And it also takes us longer to pull that data together to get a true consolidated view. All of our financial and operational visibility is limited by the amount of time and effort that it takes to put this information together. And for all of those healthcare organizations, one of their key tenets is to be able to grow and scale their business, and not having this information in one place where they can reach out and get it and know that it is accurate information that they can use for business decisions is key on their list. In fact, they tell us before they have moved to Sage Intacct that a lot of what they were doing was more tactical as opposed to strategic. So when you think about some of the systems that are being used today, many of those systems are forcing you to have multiple instances of a solution. Each one of your entities or companies, facilities, if you will, is in a separate silo. And those silos are not connected, which means that you are constantly logging in and out of those different instances. It makes it very cumbersome. It's not an efficient way to work. It's also prohibiting when you start thinking about going through acquisitions. You want to acquire another facility, or you just want to start another facility within your organization. The time that it's taking you to set that up and to get that going is lengthened because of these outdated processes. We're also seeing that many times those transactions go across those different silos. And in order to do that, you're entering data multiple times. So you're entering it into one area, and then you're turning around and entering it into another. At the end of the day, you're really prohibited from getting an accurate, up-to-date consolidation of that information. So now when we look at Sage Intacct, we're looking at a true multi-entity environment. What does that really mean? What is a true multi-entity environment? It means that you're going to log into one instance of Sage Intacct. You're going to log in once, and you're going to be able to transact and manage across unlimited numbers of entities. And just for a terminology check here, an entity, we define an entity as a separate tax ID. So think of an entity as a company. And in your case, it perhaps may be a facility. So if you have multiple facilities, each one of those being a separate tax ID, that would be considered a separate entity in Sage Intacct. When I talk about permissions, you'll learn that there are permissions across the entire footprint of the solution. Permissions start at that user level. So now you can permission your users to have access to the entities or companies that they need to transact in. Today, I'm going to be logging in as the controller, and she will have access to all entities. However, that can be controlled with permission, and you also have the ability to create new entities. In less than a minute, you can set up a new entity and be ready to start transacting. One of the other big benefits of this configuration, this multi-entity configuration, is the fact that we are able to share objects. And sharing objects is, again, going to help us be more strategic as opposed to tactical. Sharing those objects of the chart of accounts, the customer master, and the vendor master allows us to set up one chart of accounts and to use that chart across all of our entities. What that really means is we're only maintaining one chart. So when we have a new account number that needs to be added, we're adding it once. We're not adding it multiple times as we did in our current system. The same thing is true of customers and vendors, and there is also the ability to restrict those customers and vendors. So if you want all of your entities to be able to access Office Depot as a vendor, except for one particular entity, you can do that with those permissionings and restrictions. This is going to give you access to your information across all of your entities. So whether you have 2 entities or 22 entities, you will be able to transact and see that information individually and in a consolidated view. So let's take a couple of visuals here. The next 2 slides are going to paint that picture for you so that you can understand better the connectivity between the locations, the entities, and that consolidated view. Excuse me. So if you look at the bottom of the screen, you see Los Angeles, Seattle, and Chicago. Those are what we call locations. And locations are also unlimited. So you've already learned that you can have as many entities or companies as you choose. You can also have as many locations as you choose to define. If we look at the left-hand side, Los Angeles and Seattle are rolling up to that Western U.S. So think of that Western U.S. as an entity. And again, remembering that I can have as many Los Angeles and Seattles underneath that roll up to Western U.S. Same principle on the right-hand side. I have Chicago rolling up to Midwest, an entity. And then if you look at Western and Midwest, they are rolling up to that consolidated shared company. At any level in this diagram, you have the ability to see data. You can see Los Angeles independently. You can see Los Angeles and Seattle as part of the Western U.S. And then you can see the Western U.S. versus the Midwest, and you can see that in a consolidated view. So any step along this hierarchy, you have access to that data. Another view of a shared environment would be what's at the top level and what's at the entity level. So that top level that we just looked at, that's where we're talking about being able to share some of these objects, sharing the chart, sharing those vendors. And then at the entity level, you have those individual entities that maybe you want to report against a specific entity or a group of entities, and you can certainly do that. Now, there's a few benefits of having that shared entity configuration. Some of these we've already chatted about. One that I talked about early on was having transactions that maybe go across those entities or across those silos, if you remember. And how would that happen if you were not automating that? That would mean journal entries. So one of the benefits is if you are entering journal entries that need to go across those entities, if you are making payments where you're making an AP payment, one entity is paying on behalf of another entity, that's an inter-entity transaction. And today, you may be tracking that by recording it in an Excel spreadsheet, and then at the end of the month, coming in and making those journal entries. With Sage Intacct, we're going to automate that. And we're going to automate it based on how you set up and tell us the relationship between those entities. We'll create the due tos and the due froms based on those journal entries. The other thing that we're going to automate is we're going to automate a lot of the individual allocations. So let me be clear about allocations and how this would impact you. Let's say, as an example, you have multiple facilities and you engage with a marketing company. We'll use that as an example. So we engage with a marketing company. They're going to provide some brochures about our facilities, and we're going to pay them $2,500. That $2,500 invoice that's going to come from the marketing company, in other solutions, you would need to enter that invoice into each one of your companies and include their fair share. So if I was going to take that $2,500 and split it up across those 5 entities, where each one of those entities was expensed with a certain amount, that would mean 5 times I would enter that invoice. In Sage Intacct, you can set up allocation rules. We call them transaction allocation rules, and we'll do the math for you based on the rule that you set up. So that allocation can occur at the transaction level, which prevents 2 things. It prevents you from re-entering that invoice 5 times, and it also reduces the errors that you might make in entering those invoices. So the checks and balances really aren't there when you're entering that invoice 5 times. That's another benefit of being able to take a single transaction and split it across those entities. And by the way, it can be split across entities and locations, along with some other touch points that we'll talk about when we get into the software. When you get ready to close, you can close the books by entity. So now, rather than having to go in and close them individually, which you certainly can do, you can close them in mass. So you can say, I want to close all the entities at one time. You can produce your 1099s by entity. Some simple things here. However, they really increase the efficiency and the productivity of your staff and your team, and they eliminate a lot of those errors. I mentioned one other way that we are able to do allocations, and it's by utilizing what we call dimensions. However, there are 2 main reasons that dimensions are important to you. The first is that by tagging your transactions to dimensions, you're going to be able to post those transactions and create much more granular, detailed reporting. A dimension allows you to tell the rest of the story of the transaction. So today, what you're going to see is you're going to see a transaction that is posted to an office supply account. It's also tagged to a department and a location and perhaps an employee. Department, location, and employee are 3 of the 11 predefined dimensions in Sage Intacct. These dimensions, as I said, are a way for you to tag a transaction, no matter where it's coming from in the solution, to further define how you want to report on that transaction. So it gives us the ability to slice and dice the data. And these dimensions, the ones that are predefined for you, can also be supplemented by user-defined dimensions. And you can set up as many user-defined dimensions as you choose to. Now, one reason, because of reporting, dimensions is important. The second reason is because we're creating a modern 21st century chart of accounts. And that modern chart is what we call a table-driven chart. It's not a linear chart. You may be more comfortable and used to utilizing a linear type of chart where you have an account number and segments that follow that, and each one of those segments has meaning to it, and you must enter all of those segments as part of the GL account code string. Here, all you need to build your chart of accounts with is your natural or base account. So we'll take a look at that when we look at an AP invoice and how we've coded it. Again, this is a more modern way. It gives you the ability to clean up your chart of accounts to make it very lean and mean. And remember, in this shared environment, you're only needing to create one chart of accounts, and you utilize that across all entities. We're going to move into the software in just a moment. One of the things I want to finish up with here is just a quick view of some of the financial and operational visibility that you're going to see. So one of the areas that we talked about early on was that consolidated view. And for some organizations that I've talked to, their current solution really prohibits them from getting a consolidated view unless they spend hours in merging data together. In some cases, it's as much as 60 hours at the end of the month to pull that data together. We also look at how can we get different types of reports like actual versus budget. If you're using budgeting and you want to include that, you want to produce a standard report, one that pretty much every organization looks at. I want to look at, how I'm tracking against that budget. I want to see the variance. And then the last one is really very interesting because now what you're seeing is the ability to pull in operational data to create some of those key performance indicators that you can see immediately as quick business insight. And some of this data could come from your other applications, ones that maybe you're using for your billing process, or perhaps information coming from a clinical system where you have some of that operational data. You'd like to combine it with financial to come up with some different results and a different way to track how your organization is tracking. So let's go in and take a closer look. All right, so I have changed over to Sage Intacct. This may be your first opportunity to look at the solution. So let me give you a little bit of the user experience. Everyone likes to know that it's going to be easy for their team and for their group to move to a new solution. So today I've logged in as Emma, and Emma is my controller. And as I mentioned, everyone can have certain permissions. So just know that Emma is a super user today. I've pretty much turned on everything. She can access any area of the solution. She's also logged in today and been positioned right into her role-based dashboard. So the first place that we're going to see is a dashboard that contains information that's important to Emma in her role. I've also told you earlier that I'm going to be showing you a multi-entity environment. So this particular environment, I'm managing 5 entities, And these 5 entities, I've been granted permission to transact in all of them. Now, as you see me transact, I'm going to be moving through different ways to navigate. So I can navigate kind of the old-fashioned way with these menus of task, activities, and reports. I can also navigate through an overview map, and this is a view of the application in pictorial mode. Click on any of these icons, and it will take you right to that place in the software. And the third way that I can navigate is by using bookmarks. And this is a way for me to create my own personal menu. So I can save or bookmark a page, and then it will drop into this menu. I can move these items around. I can number them, rename them, and create my own personal menu from the bookmarks. So that's a little bit of the user experience. You're going to see me in a couple of different dashboards today. However, I want you to also notice that I have many dashboards in this particular environment, and I have several role-based dashboards, and you can see those now on the screen. These role-based dashboards are, again, just that. They're role-based, what's important to that person in that role. They can also be permissioned, and they can be set up as view-only dashboards. So perhaps you set up a dashboard, however, you don't want someone to change it. You can certainly set those types of rules and permissions. I also have some dashboards here in the general area around some different insights around financial ratios view. So again, just identifying that we can have many different types of dashboards with different information. Think of a dashboard as basically your view of how your business is tracking. It's also, in my mind, I think of it as a container. It's a way for me to group information together and put it into a container. So let's come back to our controller dashboard. And let's take a look at a few of the components on this dashboard. So first of all, as I open this up, that comment that I made about getting a consolidated view and how long it might take organizations to do that, I have just produced for you a consolidated view. So this is a view across all 5 of my facilities. So that $47,000 in G&A expenses here is a total across those 5 entities. Now, as I look at this, I might say, I really want to just look at a specific facility. So I can do that by utilizing those dimensions that I talked about and filter this just to a specific entity. So now the dashboard will be represented just for entity 100. So you'll notice that the G&A expenses changed because I have filtered that data to just Accord Health. Now, this dimension here that I've used, I could have used several other dimensions as well, or a combination of dimensions. Perhaps I wanted to do this by vendor, or by customer, or by item, or by project. Those are all examples of dimensions as well. So you can set the dimension filters when you define and design your dashboards. Another way to filter is by date. So if I wanted to, I could come in here and say, I don't want to look at this as of the end of December. I want to look at this as of the end of November. And now you'll see I went back to a consolidated view, but you can see that my G&A expenses are $37,000. So looking back as of a certain date is an option as well. So let's put ourselves back to the end of 2018 here and apply that. And come back to our consolidated view. Now, thinking about what's important to me as a controller, I'm always interested in some quick business insight, and that's what these first 2 rows of boxes give me. At a glance, I can see exactly how I'm tracking, and I get to choose which ones of these key performance indicators I want on my dashboard. One of the things that I look at often is I'm always tracking expenses. I'm all about controlling cost. I'm using this view to compare to a previous period. So I'm comparing December to November. And here what you see is that I've got an uptick in December on my office supplies. So let's go take a look at that. So drilling into it, I can see that I've got a couple of invoices here. Look a little bit similar, same dollar amount, same vendor. Wondering what we're buying here. Maybe this is a duplicate and we, entered it twice, got two different invoices. It would be good for me to investigate this. Anything that you see in blue is a hyperlink. One of the other things that I'll point out here is department location. Again, remember that's 2 of those 11 predefined dimensions. And also the fact that we are a multi-journal solution. So this was a transaction that was posted in my AP journal. So taking a look at this bill, this is drilling down to that source transaction. I can see it was $999. I can also take a look at the attachment, which shows me what office supplies were purchased. We can have attachments across the solution. They can be pictures, they can be documents. And then I start to see a little bit of information about where I expense this. So now I see that base or natural account from my chart. I expensed it to office supplies. I tagged it to department and location. And I also have the ability to tag it to some other dimensions. So I've tagged this also to the employee dimension and to an item called office supplies. Now, this gives me the ability to create and run reports utilizing these dimensions. So I could say, I want to look at all of the expenses that were tagged to Emma. And that would give me a listing of all of those transactions just by me tagging the transaction to Emma. So additional information here around those dimensions. You'll notice as I go through, there are lots of buttons at the top of the screens. We won't go into all of them. However, you're going to see that I always have an ability to view, to print, many times to export that information, email it to someone. Perhaps I would want to add it to a dashboard. That's another option. So that gives me a lot of choices. Once I have the data, it gives me choices as to what I want to do with it. One other thing that I want to point out here, which is the fact that we have the ability to enter conversations or send messages through to other Sage Intacct users about specific transactions. And that's what you see down here in the left-hand corner. This dialog box is how I communicate to other users. And what you see here is a communication between Emma and Nikki. And Nikki is my employee user. And Nikki has entered this transaction. My controller, Emma, is now reviewing it. And she says she doesn't think it's been coded correctly. So rather than sending Nikki an email or picking up the phone and calling her, she's entered a conversation here, and she sent it to Nikki. And Nikki gets that along with a hyperlink to the transaction. So when Nikki gets it and she does the research behind it, she can communicate right back the same way through that dialog box. Now, there's 2 great benefits to this. One, we're going to have those conversations documented at the transaction level. And the second thing is, when I design my dashboards, I like to have that dialogue here in what we call Sage Intacct Collaborate. So my collaboration with Nikki is now front and center right here on my dashboard. That gives me the ability to self-document transactions. And you'll notice there is a hyperlink to that bill number here. It's not just AP bills. It could be an AR invoice. It could be a purchase requisition. It could be any type of transaction you have the ability to record and share those conversations. So now that we've looked at the key performance indicators, and by the way, all of these work the same way. You have that drill down capability, that comparison, and the visual indicators. Let's take a look at a profit and loss report. This is a standard report for our controller. And what you see here is each one of my entities is in a separate column, along with an overall consolidated column at the end. Each one of these entities stands on its own, but again is part of that roll-up into that consolidated picture. As I look at this, I can then drill into the data the same way that you saw me drill into the AP side of the house. I've now drilled into the AR side. So for most of you, your billing is being done by another billing solution, and it's coming into our financial engine. In this case, I've entered a couple of AR invoices directly into Sage Intacct, and again, I can drill into those right here from the dashboard. As you see now, this is an AR invoice. It, in fact, has been paid, and I can drill into that. This is where, in my case, I billed the family for a particular charge to one of the residents for some additional fees. And this is where you can see that I've coded it to a specific department and location. And then to get the detail of that, I can also drill to the sales invoice, and I can see that this was for some sort of transportation. And this gives me the detail of what I invoiced for. It also gives me the history of the transaction. So I have a history tab here that shows me that visibility into what created this transaction. It came from a sales order and then to a sales invoice. I also have the details of the payment. So now I can view that cash receipt. I can see when that money came in and what bank it was deposited in and what check number it was. So think about this for a moment. Think about how you look up information today. In this case, you might have gotten up and gone to a filing cabinet, or you may have called someone, or you may have run a report. Now, right here from the profit and loss statement, from your dashboard, you were able to get all of that information. So let's take one other look at this profit and loss report. I'm going to move right into the financial report writer. This is the report writer that's used to create all financial reports. And based on permission, and I have permission as the controller, I've gone right into the financial report writer from the dashboard in the edit mode. So this is the report that has already been created. However, I would follow these steps on the left-hand side to create a new report. One of the things that I can also do with those dimensions is I can change the level of detail that shows on my report. So I can do that by coming in and just pointing to different dimensions that I want to filter by. So I'm going to change this report so that I can look at the revenue instead of by type of revenue. I'm now looking at the revenue by customer or patient. So just by utilizing that filtering on the report, utilizing the dimensions, I've now changed what that report looks like. Same report, I've just changed, and now I'm looking at the individual customers or patients. Very easy to come in and change that back. I can change it on the fly. And one of the things that you should look at here, and I'm just going to open it back up, is look at all the different dimensions that you could change by. So department, location, vendor, employee, item, project. So lots of dimensions here that you could choose to change the view of this particular report. You can also do the same thing with the columns. So one of the things that we've done is we've asked it to expand that report. So remember, the report showed you each one of those entities in a separate column. The reason it did that is because we've asked it to expand by location. Maybe we don't want to expand by location. Maybe we want to expand with a different dimension. So now instead of location, maybe we want it by department, or maybe we want it by a time period. So let's expand it into the number of weeks. And now we have a report that's going to show us the different week endings. So we can change the way those reports are filtered. We can do that on the fly if we have permission right from the dashboard. So that gives us the ability to really create and personalize these financial reports the way that you choose to see them. Now, keep in mind that these reports, these financial reports, there are about 30 financial reports that are ready to go when you implement. So things like profit and loss and balance sheet and cash flow, those are all standard reports to us. You'll have those as part of your implementation, and then you can use those to copy and create your own reports. Another report that I mentioned was the profit and loss actual versus budget. Let's take a quick look at that report as well, because this is a report that shows you a little bit different data. First of all, it's showing you the actual, and then it's pulling in the budget, and then showing you the budget percent and variance. We could show that in a dollar amount. We could show it in the percentage like we're doing here. You'll also notice there's some conditional shading turned on. That highlighting is what's going to alert you to maybe something that you need to take action on. And again, all of that same drill down capability is here. So you can drill into the data, you can drill into the specific account and look how it's structured as well. So again, anything in blue is hyperlinked, and you can drill into that. If we come back and look at this particular report, let me just point out one thing in the columns here. Again, just making sure that today you understand that when you set up these different columns, you're going to tell Sage Intacct what data to get for that column. And when you choose the column type, here we've chosen budget. So there is the capability to create your budgets in Sage Intacct and then pull them into the report, just like we've done here. You'll point to whichever budget data you want in that particular column. And then you'll go ahead and define how you want the results of that comparison in the final column here. If we come back to this profit and loss by entity, you know, one of the things that you can do with these reports is you can use the filtering. And when we filter here, we're now getting to choose, based on some of those dimensions, what we want to look at. So if I just wanted to look at Accord Health, I could take that consolidated view and I could filter it down to just Accord Health. Now, this is a great view because it shows you that hierarchy that we talked about earlier. So now what you see is I have 3 different locations underneath Accord Health that all roll to the Accord Health entity. So Riverside, Springfield, and Accord Health are all rolling to that entity called Accord Health. So this gives us the ability to create one report and then to set it up so that we can filter across those different dimensions and, of course, filter by the date. So in essence, we could have more dimensions here besides department and location. We could have all of the dimensions that are active here in this report prompt screen. It really just depends on how you define and design the report. Now, a couple of other things I just want to point out while we're here on the dashboard. Different types of report. There is an expense report by department, employee benefits, where we've done some advanced allocations, some financial ratios. And again, just remember that we've got a whole list of different types of dashboards that you have created as the business user that have permissions attached to them. And by the way, those reports that we looked at, they also have the ability to be permissioned as well. One final step that I want to cover here, and that is the report center. The report center is where all reports are housed. And I talked earlier about having financial reports already created for you. There are also on-demand reports across the subsystems. So as you get into accounts payable and accounts receivable, we've also created reports there. So altogether, in the report center, when you implement, you'll have about 150 reports. And those reports are all housed in this one place. Once you have a report defined, you can print or view that report. You can export it. You can push it out into a PDF format. You can also set it up on the Intacct scheduler to run unattended in the background. All you need to do is give us a start and end date, a frequency, and a delivery list. Set that up. We'll take care of scooping it up in the background and deploying it based on that schedule. This is a great time saver for end-of-month reports where you're wanting to package up a group of reports and send it to your stakeholders. It's also just as convenient if you want your AR manager to have an aging every Monday morning. You don't have to worry about that report being executed. You can set it right up on the scheduler, and we'll take care of it unattended in the background. So let's come back to our controller dashboard, and just a quick review that dashboards, unlimited, can be permissioned, can be set up by role, can certainly go across the key performance indicators as we looked at G&A expenses, can include all types of data, whether it be the performance cards, the reporting, any of the graphs, a cash balance trend graph here as an example. And it can also include what we learned about was that social media layer, the Sage Intacct Collaborate. So all of that information can be housed right on your dashboard. So coming back to our PowerPoint, I want to point out on the Resources tab here that this is one of 3 recorded assets for this particular vertical. There are 2 other recorded assets. One is on automation, and the other is on integration, security, and compliance. So make sure that you take advantage of listening and acting on those other 2 recorded assets. If you need more information, certainly visit our website, or if you'd like to, on the website, you can click in to see customer testimonials, you can sign up for product tours, and you can review product data sheets. If you need more information, would like to talk to someone, we'd be happy to take your call, and our number is posted here on the Resource tab. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time today.